Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Am I audible? Request the host, please unmute. Okay, thank you. All right. So today's topic is listening and why listening is important for language learning. I'm thankful to NGA to give me this platform to address such an important skill for learning, in fact, for life. And I'm thankful for all the participants who joined on time. I'm sorry that there was a technical glitch and they could not, sign everybody in. So for the next 30 minutes, we will be discussing on different aspects of listening. Now, before I start talking about listening, I would like to, give you a brief of how I'm going to take you through this 30 minutes. My objectives for this 30-minute session are, at the end of this 30 minutes, you would know how many types of listening are there. You would understand why is active listening important and how important is listening as a skill to learn. We will also talk about if it's an easy skill to practice. And in the end, we'll talk about some recommendations for listening to develop language learning. So my first point is about understanding how many types of listening are there. We have two different types of listening. We have active listening and passive listening. Active listening is when someone is listening to you without, something in their mind to judge you. And when they truly try to focus on what you're saying, to understand and to respond, or to remember what you have just said. If someone's practicing that with you, that's active listening. Active listening is actually considered as a very powerful tool in communication because it not only develops empathy in an individual, because the person who's hearing you is able to empathize with you without any judgment, but also, it changes the perspectives of people to act differently. So how can we differentiate active listening? One might ask. So I think, we can have a list of 2 or 3 parameters for you to easily identify if the person is listening to you actively or not. If the person is listening to you without interrupting, then they're actively listening. If the person is asking question and summarizing after what you have spoken to them, that is also a good example of active listening. And if they're giving non-verbal cues, like nodding their heads or making eye contact without shifting, that's also a very important aspect of active listening. So if somebody is doing this with you in a communication, that means you're sure that that person values your communication. On the other hand, we have passive listening. Passive listening is often very obvious. If you find somebody scrolling through their mobile phone in the middle of your conversation, or that's actually a very subtle sign to scroll down the phone. Or when you're just communicating without asking any deeper questions. Suppose you're speaking to somebody and you just ask them how your day was, but you do not want to know. Suppose they tell you some tragic incident has happened, you do not follow up with another question. You do not want to know more. That's when you're passive listening. Or in a classroom when children are debating about a topic, and if they are thinking about how they are responding rather than adhering to the topic, that also means that they were passively listening to the opponent. So active listening actually prevents conversations from being misunderstood, and that's how important this skill is. And as educators, by actively listening to students, we show that the students' thoughts and experiences matter. It's that important. One would say that it might promote equity in classroom, and equity in education means that everybody gets what they need, what is best suited for them. And in this era, when we have social media, which is so easy to, on our fingertips, we can text anybody, anytime, anywhere, or give our opinions regardless of whether they are needed or not. I think active listening is a much needed skill, and we have to learn how to practice it. So, why do you think that the listening is such an important skill? As most of you here are from the education field, I would want you to think a little while back when you imagine yourself as a student. I would want you to understand, or I want you to recollect what kind of experiences you had in your classroom when you were doing language learning. What kind of homework assignments were you given? Did you practice listening as much as you did reading? Were you given any homework in listening? These are very crucial questions to ask. As a language educator, I feel skills in reading, writing, listening, and speaking, they have to work in synergy for any student to develop their skills or to acquire a new language. And the reasons are many, but I think the most important reason is the evolutionary reason. Our brains are hardwired to learn languages. When we are born, we are aware that small children have really fast language acquisition abilities. So it started off a few thousand, 100,000 years ago, a few 100,000 years ago, when our species started to communicate with each other using complex language. So the oral language developed first. But written language has developed just 5,000 years ago. Hence, I don't think it's a coincidence that our young children need to listen more than they can read and write in the early stages of learning. One may ask that this kind of a skill, which is usually grasped by children in the form of first language, does it apply to second language? I think yes, it does. Again, there is an evolutionary explanation to this. We have early humans which migrated, and they came in contact with different tribes speaking different languages at different points of time. And to acquire a second language has always been an evolutionary advantage and a good survival skill. Hence, I think that oral comprehension in a second language is the most important skill that one can acquire. Listening skills are also important because they allow social interaction. We've just discussed the evolutionary aspect. I would also like to discuss the neurological aspect of language learning. It's often found that the students who are exposed to different cultures, different languages through circumstances where their parents are transferred or they become non-local students in another community, they pick up languages through social interactions. And that has shown, research has shown that there is quite a good evidence that these children who joined and who were initially timid have become more confident in those circumstances after learning to learning skills to acquire the second language, learning skills for oral comprehension of the second language. Thus, I think listening skills, they give an overall confidence boost to the child. Listening skills are also important because the way we learn language is that we acquire a correct mental pronunciation. That means we have our own pronunciation models built up in our head when we read, which may or may not be, correct, depending on the language that you're learning. Hence, it is extremely important to listen how to pronounce correctly. Hence, listening becomes an important skill. So, the biggest challenge with listening is that most of us are inefficient listeners. There were numerous studies, research which was conducted, which says that, which has shown and proved that average listener only retains 50% after listening to a 10-minute presentation. And within 48 hours, the retention levels go down by 25%. That means we are retaining only 1/4 of what we hear. And hence, the teacher has to repeat instructions every day, every week. Because some children don't just get it. Some children don't get it. But it's not their fault. And this is all neurologically, proven. So how to counteract that? Repeated instructions can help in classroom management, but for language learning, we have to have enough listening tasks in our language diet. Now, when we're talking about listening, is it an easy skill to practice? I think it is. It requires less time and less commitment, less effort than reading, writing, or speaking. It is, in fact, the easiest skill which we can practice often and extensively. As an educator, I've realized that when students are given writing assignments, they have to put in a great amount of effort and they have to be motivated enough to complete, any written assignment. Sometimes speaking assignments also need a lot of motivation because they are not sure about their vocabulary. They're not sure about the grammar that, they put across. And mostly the students find reading easier because it's more of an individual task. And most of all, listening. If listening is, encouraged in classrooms, it has shown that exposure to a wide variety of texts increases their language efficiency far better than students who have not listened. Of course, reading makes a difference, but listening is also an input skill. For those of us who are language teachers, reading and listening both are input skills, speaking and writing both are output skills. So if there is not enough amount of reading and listening, then we can be sure that there is not good quality writing or speaking coming from that student. Listening is easy because nowadays we have host of platforms where the students can log in, host different variety of materials available in the form of documentaries, movies, series, YouTube videos, podcasts, you name it. And not just the variety that is suited for classroom, but also variety which is going to give them some global exposure on topics they might not have heard of. So with a word of caution, I would like to, go forward that when I mean that all of these platforms are available, of course, they require discretion. It requires intervention from the teacher as well as the parent. And guided listening is one of the best practices that we can put our students to. If you see how the learning pyramid forms, in the learning pyramid, around 40% of the time, where the student is exposed to communication, only 30% of the language they gain from speaking, and 15% of the language they gain from reading, and 10% from writing. So that's how the language acquisition works. 30% they can learn from speaking, and 45% they can learn from listening. Whereas they can learn the language only 15% from reading and 10% from writing. So that's how important listening is. About 45% of language learning depends on good communication in English. Hence, you can see many schools advertising teachers who are good at communication skills. Now, listening is actually a primary skill in language learning. And sometimes language teachers fail to understand that. And sadly so, the teachers who are especially engaged in teaching children of young learners. Listening helps to develop, language proficiency, and also helps to develop the language expertise. When we talk of language expertise, we speak about, to all the language teachers here, we definitely, stress on the accent. We definitely talk about the sound of the, when the students make while they're pronouncing words, the stress patterns that they have, the kind of intonation that they use. They all can be adapted through listening. I remember there was an experiment wherein a foreigner was made to interact with local children of some faraway district. And all that children could get from that foreign visitor was they grasped words what that person was saying and the accent, and they started repeating the same. So it's not very difficult for students of any background to pick up stress patterns, intonation patterns, pronunciation patterns from the kind of teachers they are exposed to. And that is the reason why we have to be extra careful in classrooms when we spell, pronounce, or communicate with children. The language ability can be definitely, improved when the teachers communicate perfectly in the target language. Here I mean English. So when we communicate in English, it helps children not only acquire a form of communication, it becomes a definite example of how they can interact easily with each other. It also, in a way, it also brings about the beauty of the language. The more learned the teacher is, the more easily the teacher can explain, the easier the students find it to grasp a language. There's difference between hearing and listening, but I'm not here to talk about hearing today. We're just talking about listening. If listening in the classroom fails, or in a communication, if listening is not, active listening, then it can lead to much bigger problems than we can anticipate. We find that if the content is boring, then our minds turn to other things, focusing on trivial issues. And listening can sometimes become tiring if it is a one-way talk, like the one that I'm doing right now. I wish I could hear, you know, hear you, or maybe, invite you to participate in this discussion. But since this is an audio talk, I have to go on. So, like I said, it becomes tiring. Sometimes it becomes physically and mentally tiring. And students fail to have long periods of conversation for listening. Hence, listening tasks have to be chosen very carefully. Age wise, a fixed number of minutes can be agreed upon by the relevant teachers of different classrooms, and material can be provided from a variety of resources, and the material pertaining to different topics. That will ensure that if the students feel entertained while listening, they will definitely build their vocabulary, and that will enhance their comprehension levels of the language. In fact, they might be so glued to listening, they might look forward to what is coming next and might definitely try to emulate those examples and words in the conversations that they would make with their friends or family. So, from my experience, I find that there are certain takeaways that I can give you. As an English teacher, as a language teacher, whether you're doing any language apart from English, you can definitely invite students to gain good listening habits and give them resources in the form of some good documentaries which are available online and are suitable for that age group. Those can be audiovisual or visual, or just audio as well. But young learners, they enjoy audiovisual content. In addition to that, there are a lot of audiobooks available nowadays. Even the children's books, have been converted to audio and they are available. So you can encourage children, whether they are traveling anywhere or they're spending some free time over the weekend, they could listen to some good audiobooks. In addition to this, you can encourage them to watch entertainment shows in the target language or even news. If the children are in high school, they can definitely, listen to news, and encourage them to listen to channels which are relatively good in content, or maybe just BBC, because they'll gain a lot of English by listening those channels. Al Jazeera English is also good. I think even that can be included in the list of, exposure to good English. You can also encourage them to listen to radio shows or podcasts, which are easily available on platforms like Spotify. And in addition to this, specifically for language learning, we have the British Council website, wherein we have a host of listening activities for learners of different age groups with a wide variety of content. With this, I would like to stop here, and I would want the host to please unmute everyone so that if they have any questions, they can ask me. Does anybody have any question? Okay, I don't think we have any questions so far. You can also type if you have any questions. So I'm going to wrap up the show for now. Thank you for listening and thank you for being patient with us. Inshallah, we'll return next week with another interesting topic. I hope I have given you an idea of how listening is important in classrooms, especially to learn the target language. And inshallah, we'll meet next week, inshallah. Thank you so much, MGA, for giving us this platform. And thank you, listeners, for being patient. Assalamu alaikum.